Welcome back. My last talk was a year ago. We talked about pumpernickel. For those of you who are new to the group, and I'm not sure we have anybody new, which actually I love, I've missed you all. So it's very nice to see that this core group is still here. But my name is William Rubel, and we are um, speaking from or broadcasting from my kitchen in Santa Cruz, California. It is raining today. We are like 38% of normal, so we're very happy for the rain, but only have another few weeks to catch up. I apologize for the big gap. I know that for most of you, you just live for these talks, and wondered what was happening, what was missing. This part was missing from your life. I came up with a brilliant idea that I would do better if I focused on a single project at one time. And I was working on a mushroom project, a mycology project. I am revising the way in which mushroom field guides determine mushroom edibility, the whole paradigm of mushroom edibility in mycology. And it just became all immersive. And I thought if I only did that, I would finish quickly. But I didn't finish quickly. Things got more and more involved, more in depth. And then these people invented this generative AI, which only means that for people who do research, the pit is bottomless because now you can find everything. Any case, I really have more or less wrapped up that project, and now I have rearranged my life, and I'm going to be keeping this going now forever, we'll say. So thank you for coming, and there will be another talk in a few weeks. And at the end, we can talk about what you might like to talk about. I actually am thinking about a talk on a workshop on using AI to evaluate recipes to help us write recipes and then also to understand things like the assize for bread that requires mathematical analysis in order to get information, useful information out of it. So, let us start with introductions. And because it's been a while, just we'll begin in Europe for people who are in Europe. I don't think there's anyone from India. Anybody beyond Western Eurasia here should introduce themselves now. I don't think so. So how about, and we can start to modernize the way we speak, how about the Western Eurasians? I know we have a few people here to introduce themselves. Anne, would you like to lead off?
Okay, I'm in the UK, about 40 miles north of London. Um, and my main interest is in historical, well, I love food and cooking, but my main interest is historical recipes. Um, and that's really why I'm here, to follow up on the history of bread.
Well, thank you very much. Priya, would you like to introduce yourself? You don't have to, but if you would like to, tell us a little about yourself and what you do with
Sure.
bread.
I live in Copenhagen, and I come from India. So just to put the context there, I was born and brought up, raised in India. I've lived here for 18 years now. I work with food, both as a writer, but also I cook and I cook for a living sometimes. Right now, I'm working on a book. But I think what brought me to you was yeah, as you rightly said, it's the food history and cooking from history. And I also really enjoy working with old manuscripts and recreating food to try and understand what flavors were and what have we lost, what have we kept, and what are they constantly transforming and becoming in today's world. I think.
Thank you. So Priya, back to the Indian. Um, so are you from North India? So are you in a bread culture, India, or
So yes and no. I'm Tamilian. So my ancestry is from Tamil Nadu, which is the southern part of India, where we are mainly rice eaters. But we do have many rice-based breads as well, and unleavened
No,
rice.
not yet. I was just going to take one earlier.
But my parents traveled a lot around India, so I had a very nomadic childhood. They lived in different parts of India. My mother was also not raised in Tamil Nadu, so I think for two generations now we've not lived in, we're not from that part of the country. So bread and making flatbreads, making roti and different forms of roti has become part of the family vocabulary in a way.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Perhaps we could be in touch, and because it's obviously an endless, huge, deep subject, and it's something that I know little about, and I know the group knows little about, and we all would like to learn more and to be more proficient flatbread makers. I am actually a fairly proficient flatbread maker. I am now making flatbreads at least once a week, developing my skills. So, could you maybe write something, some contact in the chat for me?
Uh,
And then maybe we could Zoom. And for everybody with me, I'm terrible with the email. Actually, just having a talk, Zoom, is probably going to work best. Um, so, a few more introductions. Jeremy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, very briefly. My name's Jeremy Cherfas. I come at food from a biological and agricultural perspective. I bake a lot myself, and I have a podcast called Eat This Podcast, on which Priya and William have been guests. That'll do.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. So let's have another few introductions, another, say, 3 minutes worth, and then you can continue next time, put it that way, so that we can really get started with the presentation. So, from anyone, I don't think we have anyone from South America. It's everybody else, US and Canada, it looks
In
like.
Europe.
Anyone else in Europe?
Yeah, Leah. Hi, Leah.
All right.
Hi.
Yes,
Sorry, I'm just lurking.
Okay.
I help Ken a little bit, and he brings me all these awesome things like you. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, thank you for coming, Leah. Ken, I'm going to save you for when I introduce you as a co-sponsor. Who else would like to introduce themselves? Hey, Chung,
Yes,
are you up
I
for it?
can.
Oh, you can?
Sorry.
Okay, go. Just go for it.
Yeah, I'm driving in the car. So, Peter Wegels. I'm working with a bakery ingredient company. I'm working since 40 years ago. I started in the baking industry as a researcher and still am. But I'm also interested in archaeology. So that binds me to this group.
Wonderful. Did you, are you in Holland? Are you Dutch? Are you the one that made some
Oh, yeah.
suggestions? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the Netherlands.
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you, Netherlands. Thank you. You made
Sorry.
a really good suggestion when we were in the talking about Egyptian bread, and thank you for that. Couple more. Hey, Chung, do you want to say hello?
Hi, I'm Hejung Cho. I'm in Los Angeles. I'm sorry about the noise. I'm walking my dog, and let's see. I am very interested in all things fermentation, and of course, bread is a fermented product. I mostly do catering and also teach classes on fermentation and kimchi making in particular. One side note, my boss is actually a Danish chef. So I was born in Seoul, Korea. I live in Los Angeles. I work for a Danish woman. So that's how international we all are.
Wonderful. Thank you, Hey Chung. So maybe one other. Pamela, would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, I can.
Okay.
Sure.
I'm
can hear me?
Pamela
Oh,
Cooley. I
different
live
We'll
in.
do both. We'll do both Pamelas. Okay, Pamela.
I'm Pamela Cooley. I live most of the time in upstate New York, but I'm currently living for a couple months on Cape Cod.
I'm a historic cook and a food history researcher. I've been in the last year, I've become affiliated with two more living history museums, Hyde Hall, which is a mansion in Cooperstown from about early 1800s, and Kilts Farm, which is also a living history museum, interpreted to late 1800s to early 1900s. Um, but this last year, I've also become involved in catering for groups who are doing marine debris cleanup, up to 30 people on islands, Cuttyhunk Island and Boston Harbor Islands. And that's been a really rewarding experience.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Pam Pierce. So both Pams
Oh,
introduced today.
well, I live in San Francisco and I write about gardening and food. And I'm interested in food history. I'm a member of the Bay Area Culinary Historians. And my website, I'm just putting it up on my blog so that you can find it. I have two, I'm putting it up in chat. I have two blogs. One of them is on gardening and on cooking, in which I put recipes about the things you can cook that you can grow. And the other is called What Do People Want? And it's going to be a political and philosophical and feminist environmentalist blog. So check it out.
Well, thank you. All right. So we will continue with introductions next time. It's wonderful to hear what people are doing. I think it's good for me. I think it's good for all of us to hear each other. I think I never push my Facebook group, Bread History and Practice, enough. So I would like to mention the group and particularly to say that anybody that's doing anything food related is free to promote their work at the group. There's 4,000 members, and also, of course, free to post anything that is bread related. All right. Let me start then. I'm going to share the screen and we're going to move more into the talk. Where are we going here? Why? Let me unplug that screen. Okay. Every history is a story, and every story is a fiction. I've been working on this history of bread since 2002, unbelievably, when I finished my Magic of Fire. And I didn't know or understand myself to understand exactly what I was doing. But I have learned recently that I am on the spectrum. And one thing that spectrum people do is focus on detail. So I've spent essentially 25 years focusing on the minutia of bread history. I have a small bread history book called Bread, A Global History, published by Reaction Books in London. It's not really a global history, but every book in the series that they put out is a global history. So it's a small book, easy to read, and that is really all that I have published out of this. But I have written approximately 850,000 words. At some point, Dara Goldstein suggested that I write a book for UC Press. I made a proposal, and my thought for that proposal was that I would establish a fact base that historians could use to create the kind of global history that we have from Kurlansky, Codd, Salt, and other authors. Because I didn't have that in me. I didn't have a concept. I didn't have a global view. All I had was the knowledge that most of what we could read about the history of bread in the year 2000, 2002, 2005 was not based in primary sources, was not based in facts. When I started out, I began going to libraries. I have enough money to do that. So I remember I was at the Athenaeum in the US. I spent time at Chateau de Fay, the chateau that Anne Willan and her husband Mark owned. I spent time in other private libraries, library in Leeds, various libraries, and I was just looking at books. Sometimes you couldn't take photographs or even have a computer. And I got a D in handwriting in third grade. It did not get better. So a lot of that research was of no use whatsoever. But fortunately, I fell into the online databases before they really were even public. I'm not going to go into that story now. It's not so important, but I've kept at it. I'm now in the process. I'm working with. I actually was able to hire my former editor at Mother Earth News, Rebecca Martin, is now working with me every morning from 8:30 to 10:30, helping me to complete manuscripts. One part of this bread manuscript is a dictionary of bread terms, primarily in English. That manuscript is about 100,000 words long, and we are in the process of completing A through C, which I am going to publish as a separate volume. The current trajectory for my book of bread is that I am going to begin publishing it as private small volumes and put off a single volume for another day because I have so much in this book that I think just needs to get out, but really doesn't fit into a commercial history. I like to go when I travel. I go to the same place, the same hotel, the same cafes every trip. And I found a cafe in Japan, in Kanazawa, where they allow me to arrive at 7:30 in the morning and write until they close at 3 in the afternoon. And I have taken a break this summer and I haven't been since last June, but I am going to be going there every 2 or 3 months now, probably for some years. We'll see, to really finish this book and finish this work on bread, which at first is going to be published in small volumes, which I will talk about later. So in June, I arrived on a Monday morning and I had nothing written. And 5 days later, I had this text I am going to read you part of today called Every History is a Story and Every Story is a Fiction. It's 10,000 words. And I am able to get into that reading voice that's very melodic and hypnotizing. And it's lovely, I think, to hear it from start to finish. But what I'm thinking of doing today is reading it in sections because really it's written in lots of small sections. And we can discuss sort of bit by bit. Does that sound good with you guys? Sort of bit by bit reading, discuss versus a monologue. Is that a yes for everybody? Anybody? Everybody's saying yes. Okay. So that's what we're going to do. This series is co-sponsored by Ken from a Cultures Group. And since we're all regulars, we've heard from him before. Ken, would you just like briefly, Ken, like me, likes to, tends to talk. So, but Ken, for this, can you be brief? Tell us what's happened in the last year, how you've restructured, if you I believe you have, and just lead us into it, say 1 or 2 minutes.
Yeah, hi everyone. It's good to see Leah. We had a few tragedies, and we no longer have Stuart, who was killed in a bicycle accident, and was pretty much had all of our material online on his computer. So we had to reformulate everything and decided to go all the way to Substack where there's no advertising and they don't push any algorithms or down anyone's throat. So anyone interested in anything related to grains or starches or pseudo cereals, tumors, etc., and baking, leavening, enzymatic activity, etc., is invited to come and join and participate. And all that info is on the screen right now.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ken.
Sure.
So now, as you know, ritualistically, we start with the same 2 slides. Bread is an invention, like a chair, a car, a shoe, or a necklace. Bread is the product of culture. It is highly technical. And in fact, it was the greatest technical challenge, I think, that the late Pleistocene and epic Paleolithic hunter-gatherers morphing into farmers were engaged in. We inherit bread from the moment of the glacial maximum. Bread is roughly 24,000 years old. And as bread has spread from its origins globally, of course, we have many, many, many sort of sub-bread cultures. Indian bread culture, very distinct from the Western Eurasian bread culture. Even to the extent now of the kind of wheat they like. India prefers white wheat over the red wheat that we use in North America and in most of Europe, most of Western Eurasia. The story that I'm going to tell today is really the story, not really a story. I'm talking today about how we find the story of bread, how we find the history of bread in this extremely long period of time, given that very little was ever written down. And now what you're going to find here is that I actually have discovered a narrative arc. I found what I believe animates the history of bread globally. So out of the details, this million words, details, as you will see in this talk today, in this chapter, I really think the history of bread boils down to one sentence, as we shall see. Now, when you look up in the stars at night, and those of you who don't live in the cities or on camping trips, and it's a clear night, we see all of these stars. And if one's conversant with the mythologies of one's culture, then there are names. Most of us in this group are familiar with the Greek and Roman names for the constellations, Cassiopeia, etc. But one thing that you won't find there, no matter how hard you stare, no matter how hard you love some particular loaf of bread, no matter how much you love a particular way of making bread, neither that bread nor the process are written in the stars. They're written in culture, and they're written in our hearts. But remember, as an invention, bread is only culture. You don't have the excuse, well, there's an apple on a tree, and the new apple is, say, bigger than the native apple from breeding, but still, apple is apple. The DNA is the same. Bread only exists because of human ingenuity and every part of it is a work of culture, and our love for particular loaves is cultural. Now, I have two slides that have illustrations, and then we will move on without them. Every history is a story, and every story is a fiction. This is the farmer sowing his corn that kept the cock that crowned in the morn, that woke the priest all shaven and shorn, that married the man all tattered and torn, that kissed the maiden all forlorn, that milked the cow with a crumpled horn, that tossed the dog, that worried the cat, that killed the rat, that ate the malt, that lay in the house that Jack built. So why do you think I find that sort of a core document, a core idea with which to begin thinking about the history of bread? Come on, guys, be brave. Whenever I talk to, I also work with children. And the children, they're used to it. They raise their hand. Somebody's going to say something. So come on. What's in here? What's not in here? What's this about? What's this about? Anybody? You just want me to talk?
The corn being the basis of everything.
What did you say, Bob?
Corn being the basis of everything.
Okay, yes, that is one answer, and a very, very solid one. That corn, which of course is the English word for grain and eventually got hijacked by maize. Corn is the basic of everything. In fact, wheat is the basic of everything. And while at the beginning there was rye, einkorn, emmer, spelt, and free threshing bread wheat, over time, what we found was that people liked the free threshing bread wheat, our common bread wheat. By the early Bronze Age, it already was the majority grain. And now barley and rye are not just footnotes to bread history, they're footnotes to footnotes. There aren't even international or many national statistics on barley and rye crops for human consumption. So yes, of course, this story is about the house that Jack built, but we've got the grain here. So there's the link that actually it's the grain that built the house. It's the grain. It's the grain that put Neil Armstrong on the moon. Wheat is the largest crop by acreage in the world, and it represents roughly 20% of all human calories. Some sources say up to 30%. If suddenly today there was no wheat, then we would have global social collapse, and that would be the end of it all. But who makes the bread? Who made bread? Who made the first bread? Come on, guys. Feminists, there, come on, women, who made the bread? Well, bread was made by women. And we know this from the archaeological record, we know this from the ethnographic record, and it's only very recent that men have started making bread at home. We were the commercial bakers largely, because women can't do things outside the house that they can't do with children. But where is the woman in the story here? Where is the woman in the story here? The woman is not in the story here. And that is one of the core ideas in trying to reconstruct the history of bread, is that the women who made the bread are absent. Every history is a story. Every story is a fiction. The great writer of historical fiction, Hilary Mantel, spoke about the task of bringing history alive through a biblical story, that of Ezekiel, who was walking with his Lord through a valley of bones, here, there, everywhere, gray, dried, desiccated bones. And his Lord asks him, Son of man, can these bones live again? For the historical novelist, Mantel saw her task as refleshing the bones of long dead men and women who had lived and walked, loved and hated, kissed and spurned, plotted and were plotted against in a known place. In fact, in her own city of London. But a long time ago, though not so long ago, that there were not a myriad of records, physical places where the bones had walked, letters the bones had written about themselves, letters and other texts that had been written about them, works of art that suggested what at least some of the bones had looked like, and so on and so forth, and thus applying her colossal imagination to her prodigious historical research. She reanimated the bones of her protagonists, bringing the past alive. And so here you see one of the protagonists, one of the bones, and some more minor bones, fleshed out by an artist. And this is the kind of thing that really we don't have for bread. And if you think about the kind of archives that Hilary Mantel used and worked through to write Wolf Hall and the subsequent books in that series, pretty much none of that exists for us. And so really the question that I'm posing and working through in the text that we will begin today, we will not get to the end, is how do we tell the story of bread or the stories of bread? Any questions, comments, ideas at this point? Okay.
William, I've yeah, maybe some ideas to put in because I've seen a tale from the old Greek. The tale was written by the goddess Ceres, and she was telling that she brought cereals or wheat to mankind. And she has a kind of list of commandments to the people on earth. And in the top of the commandments, there is the goodness or the fact that she brought wheat to the world. And then she continues not to quarrel, not to, that a man should keep his wife in faith and things like this. So that's one thing which would be great to evaluate. And then at the end of history is that that before the Second World War, I know that women were making the dough. They were actually preparing the dough to bring to the baker, and the baker is called a baker. But that's my interpretation of the word baker, is that he baked only. He didn't make the dough. He only baked it because the oven was hot, so families could come with their dough to bake it. So he is not the bread maker, he is a baker. That's maybe for historians something I'm thinking why that was never brought forward. So before the Second World War, women were making the dough at home, so with their children, so they could take care of everything. It took time, so you need to have attention to it. But the baking itself is a communal activity because the oven is a hot thing. You need a lot of wood. And once the oven is hot, you can bake more breads.
Well, thank you very much. That is a very nice story, and the mythological story. We will be getting into that, not necessarily not in today's reading, but also that's a nice version. I'm not familiar where she's giving commandments. If you recall where you saw that and could put it in the chat, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, I'll do some research. But that's an important idea that the Greeks had, that the world, the age of that humans, that civilizations was separated by the before bread, the before wheat and the after wheat, and that wheat was a civilizing force. Before wheat, life was rude and crude and primitive, and after that, we got civilization, which is absolutely one of the themes of the book. But also, I appreciate that you emphasized wheat. Um, they were growing a lot of barley. They weren't just growing wheat, but wheat, wheat, wheat. And we will get to that. And yes, communal baking ovens, that was a thing for a long time. But there also were bakers, commercial bakers, going back thousands of years. Thank you. I guess there's one more slide.
Hi, William. This is
Yes.
Jane Bardwell.
Hey, Jenny, welcome. Good to see you.
I'm always interested in raised bread. Like, why and when did the first raised bread come about, and why? Because
Okay.
certainly there were lots of flatbreads, and there were the tandoor ovens that facilitated flatbreads.
Well, Jenny, I think so that my purpose today is to work through this text. So I just will briefly and quickly just say that I think the geography of the loaf bread and the flatbread has to do with the availability of firewood, that there is a geographical reason for flatbread versus loaf bread, but flatbreads doesn't mean that they weren't necessarily yeasted or leavened with sourdough. Flatbread simply means that it's going to be, centimeter, 2 centimeters maximum. But we will hold that thought. Continuing. Every history is a fiction. There's an extensive literature on the unreliability of eyewitnesses in criminal proceedings. The whole point of having multiple witnesses in a trial is because it's impossible to trust one single account. Each account, even if they agree on the main points, offers multiple perspectives. Most histories and novels are told as if there is one story, and that story is the singular truth. There is no question that Mr. Wickham in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice is an unscrupulous ass, or that Lydia Bennet has issues. But what is each of their stories through their eyes? What is the life that they experienced? All of our information comes from the people who judge them. How does the wind that blows in their face feel to them? Jane Austen doesn't tell us. The American novelist William Faulkner is well known for nonlinear storytelling. He adjusts the literary structures he employs for his narratives depending on the story he tells. His structures run in form and complexity from relatively simple alternating narratives, one chapter or section in one voice, to another chapter or section in another voice. His most complex narrative is that of The Sound and the Fury, in which there are 4 sections, each narrated by a different character, with 14 time shifts integrated into the narratives. Yes, a story very difficult to untangle, but isn't life difficult to untangle? There is an edition of The Sound and the Fury that illustrates the different times with different colors. The text, of course, is almost impossible for a human, someone just to read. Of course, this idea here is the idea that there is not one story of bread. There's not just one telling. There's many different perspectives. And that our record of the history of bread is told by people that have a particular perspective, as Jane did in Pride and Prejudice. So we never hear the voice of Mr. Wickham, not that there's any chance he has anything to say for himself that would excuse his bastardly and dastardly actions. Nonetheless, Lydia might have a voice, and she doesn't. And of course, this follows from remembering the house that Jack built. So one of the big voices in History of Bread that does not exist is that of women. And we're also going to find that the poor don't have a voice. Our whole narrative of bread that was written, most of the record that's written, is written by the elite. You know, people like me, people like you, that don't have calluses on our hands. Anyone, including now, is an elite who doesn't toil physical labor for a living. You know, we have it easy. And of course, this was all written by men who didn't bake, because all baking was by women or by professional bakers. And this is true back to the Epipaleolithic. This is something true for all time. So I realize it's easier for you to see it on the screen. So I'm going to actually stop share and recalibrate, get onto the manuscript online. Any comments here, any ideas that this triggers? Okay. Then let us pull up the manuscript. I think there is a view here. I think there is a page view. Well, we'll just have to use this one. All right. I'm going to share again. Where are we? Zoom. Share. 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 Minimize the box. Herodotus of Halicarnassus is the first historian. He invented the genre. Through a series of public lectures and then his books, he created the concept of the historian, a person who sifts through sources to refine a narrative of events that's true to those events and, at the same time, through this sorting and refining, preserves the events in a kind of time capsule. The process is inherently reductionist. William Faulkner's novels can be interpreted as a critique of the concept of there being an historical truth, as can the problem of establishing at trial whether what eyewitnesses relate is actually true. Eyes take in light. It's the brain that interprets. Isn't it extraordinary? Translation, on the face of it, a reasonably straightforward job of finding like for like, is so unstraightforward that each generation retranslates the same texts the most gifted translators of the previous generations had spent their lives working on. The reason I bring up Herodotus is that his stated purpose established the pathway most historians still follow. That's the pathway focused on events. Here are the opening words of the first book of his histories, in which he explains his purpose. Not reading Greek, I will read an English translation. Here are presented the results of the inquiry carried out by Herodotus of Halicarnassus. The purpose is to prevent the traces of human events from being erased by time and to preserve the fame of the important and remarkable achievements produced by both Greeks and non-Greeks. Among the matters covered is, in particular, the cause of the hostilities between Greeks and non-Greeks. For a history of bread, the key concept is that Herodotus sets out to prevent the traces of human events from being erased by time and to preserve the fame of the important and remarkable achievements produced by both Greeks and non-Greeks. Now, this struck a cultural chord amongst his contemporaries, and ever since, mainstream history has been about human events with a particular focus on the men who moved mountains. Working in multitude of languages and cultures, countless numbers of historians have continued the work started by Herodotus. They preserve the memory through recording human events. But the choice of events, the sense of what is important, has tended to ignore bread, the food that fed the men who moved the mountains. Like so much else outside of Herodotus' stated purpose, bread and bread culture was largely omitted from the stories that have come down to us. Until very recently, social history in general, and the lives of women in particular, have not interested historians. In the Egyptian religion, it was important that one's name be spoken after one's death. Speaking the name conferred immortality. The names of very few breads, our protagonists, are written down. As scanty as bread references are, sometimes nothing more than a carelessly defined word in a dictionary, it's probably true that even less attention was paid to the women who made them, and who, for thousands of years, had bodies broken by long hours crouched in front of a grindstone. A model of such a broken body can be visited at the British Museum and are documented in many archaeological papers. Even though every single person, porridge eaters, subsisted on bread within the cultural sphere touched by Greek culture, eventually projected through European colonialism to include the entire world, the kinds of historical accounts and archival sources that historians and historical novelists have available to them regarding important people in big events, like monarchs in war, are lacking. Bread historians work with dust, illuminated by moonbeam. Histories of the last couple hundred years remain heavily influenced by Edward Gibbon's 18th century The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, including this one. Gibbon, writing 2,600 years after Herodotus, established the paradigm for subsequent histories. Through the power of his work, he established the standards of documentary rigor on which today's histories are measured against. In his words, I may therefore be allowed to say that I have carefully examined all the original materials that could illustrate the subject which I had undertaken to treat. And this is the point where historians and novelists part ways. The historian is stuck with only what the original material says, while the novelist, consulting the same material, can use her imagination to bring us inside the minds and lives of characters she animates through reference to history, what it says about them, and what source material is found in archives. While we have very little by way of historical reference or archival materials to assist us in our quest to tell Bread's story, we do have one advantage over the historical novelist. Many of the subjects of this bread history are protagonists we can meet. Are we good so far? Any questions or comments? Okay, well, we'll be like an auction. Except hearing none, we go on. Hewing rigorously to primary documents, there was a fortuitous find of two breads, one a barley bread and one a wheat bread, from a Swiss late Neolithic village built on stilts over what is now Lake Zurich. If you ever go to Zurich, you can see the site if you park in the parking lot of the Zurich Opera. We'll look at these breads in more detail, as the describing archaeologist does such a precise job that we can combine his photographs of the breads with his analysis with electron microscopy and experimental archaeology to recreate them exactly. It's clear there was social division in the seemingly bucolic lake village. There were big houses with fine possessions and smaller houses with not so fine possessions, and a fence with a gate separating the two. Two breads were found, a coarsely formed, unrefined barley bread and a finely formed, refined wheat bread. No archaeologist would flout out and say this, but we can make the leap. The barley bread belongs to those with few possessions, and the wheat loaf to the people with more possessions. It is said that we first eat with our eyes. the first bread does not eat well. Barley, unsifted, not much love was put into its baking. Do we really need to ask which houses that bread was destined for, or in which houses the wheat eater lived? This village dates to roughly 5,000 years ago. In Egypt, at the same time, Namor became the ruler. In the historical chronology of archaeologists, this is when Egypt's first dynasty was first formed. Material-rich civilizations were just beginning. But in terms of my telling of bread's story, this is roughly 17,000 years after our story's first beginning, at the time of the glacial maximum in the archaeologist-named settlement of Ohelo II on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and 9,000 years after its second beginning, dating to the first confirmed breadcrumb at the Epipaleolithic Shabuka I Natufian settlement in what is now Jordan. By the time the barley and wheat breads found themselves in a lake rather than stomachs, it seems clear that barley and wheat had each acquired different cultural status. As a crop, barley is easier to grow than wheat. Barley persists as an important bread crop for millennia, but, and there is a but, collectively, by the early Bronze Age, common bread wheat, the crop that is today the largest crop by acreage in the world, had overtaken the other bread grains as the primary bread grain of the ancient world. Because of the quality of archaeobotanical reports of ancient breads, we are able to recreate them exactly. We can get to those breads, and we will get to those. When we get to those breads in more detail, you will have the images of them and detailed instructions. You will be able to make both the crude barley bread and the fine wheat bread. And it's when you meet these two breads, when you look at them and eat them with your eyes, and then when you eat them with your chews, you will find that there will be a lot to think about. That is because when you bring the carelessly made, elite, rejected barley bread into your kitchen and finally into your own body, you will find that it is delicious, flat out delicious, sweet and moist. It is complex. It tastes so good, this barley bread. But over time, we find that it's a bread that is extirpated from nearly all bread traditions. Who amongst my readers, or who amongst us today, can purchase a barley bread in their local baker? Who amongst us today has ever baked one? Beauty, Shakespeare wrote, in Love, Labor's Lost, is bought by judgment of the eye. Beauty, Margaret Wolfe Hungerford wrote, is in the eye of the beholder. A central idea will be developed, a theme that runs through the loaf bread portion of our story, a theme that runs through the story of bread centered on the focus of Gibbon's first volume, The Decline and Fall of the Western Empire, the Land of Loaf Breads, and drawing on the 2nd century Roman satirist Juvenal, bread is introduced as the social sifter. As the bolting cloth sifts the flour. And here we are just speaking of wheat. The color of the crumb becomes lighter and lighter. Lighter flour makes lighter bread. Juvenal's epiphany is that Roman society was sifted by the color of its bread. Latin is the only language I am aware of that contains two sets of terms describing grades of wheat flour. One set for wheat berries that have a red pericarp, the choice most favored by North American bakers, and another set for wheat with a white pericarp. White wheat is the grain that was favored by early modern European bakers and is the wheat favored by today's Indian bakers and Asian noodle makers. The Roman bias against barley is confirmed by the lack of any terms for the refinement of barley, and as for rye, as far as we can tell, that was rejected grain. All I want to say about this here is that as an ape with the potential for establishing super sophisticated hierarchical social structures, that the Latin language itself implies that in classical Rome, sifted bread, sifted people to a degree of breadcrumb subtlety that is hard to imagine. But how else to explain One word for double sifted white flour from red wheat, pollen. And one word for double sifted white wheat, siligo. From Pliny the Elder's explication of wheat flour terms, we can know that the narcissist bully of a host of the meal described in Juvenal's fifth satire as white as snow was made with double sifted white wheat, which is also the flour used in the high status English manchet. The quest for the whites carried forward to modern bleached flours.
William,
Yes?
comment on things like rye and to a lesser extent barley. You're looking at the moment at Greek and Roman authors. Place that things like barley and rye grow much better in the north. They weren't being that was barbarian land to the Greeks and Romans.
Well,
So you won't find them.
well, no, but barley was a very, very big crop in Greece
But
and
yeah,
Rome.
barley is because of brewing.
Not
Barley's
not
northern
not just
and
because
it
of
does
brewing.
grow. But place
Well,
things like rye, you're definitely going to find they're northern.
that's
They
correct.
don't they don't grow in the Mediterranean.
That's right. It's northern. Um, in Southern Europe, it just grows up in the mountains, and I think Galen. Pretty much the only reference. I think there's a reference in Galen, very, very brief. He just says,
It
just
exists.
it exists, but it's no good. Um,
Yeah.
the barley was the bread fed, and barley was there. There was a lot of barley bread in ancient Rome, but it was the bread for the enslaved. I think we all have to remember that Rome was a slave society. Cato the Elder, in his book on agricultura, he feeds his enslaved, chained farm workers barley bread. When you were punished in the Roman army, one punishment was to be fed barley bread, which you then had, when you were eating on this punishment of barley bread, you ate that outside the walls of the encampment. You were no longer really part of the polis, part of the group. But I think the vocabulary thing is really cool to think about. Even for us, there's no sophisticated milling terms, even in modern English, for a barley at all, and barely anything for rye. It's only for wheat. Any other comments or questions at this point?
Yeah. William, you mentioned something about a differentiation, Asian, like white wheat, no?
Yes, I did absolutely. So white, so wheat comes with these two colors, white and red. And in European herbals, like the Great Herbal by um, um, by John Gerard, 1597. And then also the first wheat is white wheat. White wheat comes first in all of these herbals. And white wheat, I'm going to answer your question, but I got into a slight digression. When you go to the grocery store and you see these loaves of whole wheat bread made by the factory bakers that are in the plastic, and you think, my God, that looks awfully light for a wheat bread. Well, the answer is they're using white wheat. So in the loaf bread tradition of 2024, white wheat is used to make whole grain breads look less whole grain for people who want to eat whole grain, but they don't want to eat a brown bread. White wheat is the main wheat grown it's the exclusive wheat grown in India. So atta flour, which is a very finely ground wholemeal flour, is made with white wheat. But Australia is the big producer of white wheat for the Asian noodle market that Asia's not producing itself for its noodles. But there is even now, there'll be it'll just be whiter because that you'll have some little dust from it. Um, and so yes, Asian noodles are made with white wheat.
And you think any of that was due to climate, really? I mean,
No, I don't believe it has nothing to do with climate. White and red wheats just grow right together. Now, digressing then a little bit, and so if you go to no, we can ask Priya. Are you there? Are you able to speak right now to answer a question?
Sure.
ask it.
Okay, so what is the color complexion wheaten?
From a social perspective in India, when you say someone's of wheatish complexion, then it's someone who's fairer, someone who's more North Indian with lighter skin. I think if you meant that, that
That's
would,
exactly
yeah.
what I mean.
Yeah. That's a very common word, and you can read that in matrimonial columns.
Exactly. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, wheaten is the ideal skin color for Indian women. Now, the fact, the fact, the fact that there is white and red wheat, and there is still white and red wheat, it tells us that white and red wheat were being selected for forever, for absolutely forever. This is an ancient selection, and it suggests, if I may, white bread is a preference. Lighter colored breads are a preference amongst humans. And this is the reason for having maintained this white wheat line, but it also fits in some much deeper cultural ideas because this association of the wheaten complexion, I'm sure, is very, 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 very old. Very, very, very old. Okay.
Can I just add a point there, William?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also a case of English being used as a language to transliterate a rather local idea of being fair-skinned. The local Hindi words for some to describe a woman with lighter skin would be to compare her to marble, like sangemarmar, or to compare her to the moon, which is very, you find this a lot in Urdu poetry, in music, in shairi, which is like couplets. You find this idea of other objects and not bread.
So you think so it's a new so the use of wheaten is a recent.
Oh yes, I think it's
Of course,
it's
it's
a
not
gift
certainly
of
not as
English.
it's
It's
English.
English in the hands of Indians, I think.
Okay, but nonetheless, do you agree that it refers then to the wheat grown in India, which is white wheat? That you're looking for that sort of blonde, just slight
Yes.
tan color of the pericarp. Yes. Okay.
If you talk, sorry to interrupt, in German it's Weizen, and also in the Old Dutch, Weite, it's also the same word as white, like in English.
What do you say, Weizen?
Weizen were the same word in the beginning, and later it diverged into wheat and white, I think. But that's how I see it from the Germanic languages, where it's still in where you still have Weizen, and white is Weiss, and it's the same word still. And Weiss is white, and Weizen is wheat.
So oh wow. Okay.
And in Old Dutch it was called Weitebrood, which is made from wheat. And you had rye bread, which was different, which was a dark bread.
Okay, well, that's a very, very interesting idea, Peter. In entomology, entomology, not entomology. You know what I'm trying to say. Um, um, in looking at the origin of word meanings, we can have false friends. Sometimes those associations are coincidental, but the words have different origins. But I will look that up. I think that's really that would be very. Thank you,
Can I
Peter.
just say something, William?
Yes.
Two things actually. One prompted by this. There's a bird called the wheatear. In common name in English is the wheatear, and the etymology of that is that it has a white arse, a white rump.
Really?
So that's yeah. But what I also wanted to say is that there are several different pericarp colors in wheat. There are yellows, much more yellow than white wheat. There are purples. There's kind of very dark purples that are almost black. They've fallen by the wayside, I think, for the same reasons that you're describing, which is that there is a preference for whiter wheat, or there was a preference for whiter wheat. Nowadays, of course, if you're rich, you can afford whole wheat bread, and you can afford to be seen to be eating whole wheat bread. I mean, I think there's a signaling aspect to the whiteness of your wheat, which I think you're saying a human preference for white wheat. I might counter that by saying it's a status signal because of the amount of wheat you have to throw away, the amount of food you have to throw away in order to get a white loaf. And that what you're seeing when you think of a human preference for white wheat is actually a human preference to mimic high status.
Okay, there's a bunch in there, and I have a hard time.
I agree
picking
with
them.
that.
No.
I agree with that, by the way.
Okay, let me.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jeremy, okay, let me try to keep track of all of that. So let's back up. Yes, I knew about purple wheat, but not a yellow. I will look at that because I think any time I'll look into that. The So the earliest breads had been sifted from the beginning. So the bread at the first Epio-Paleolithic carbonized crumb of bread that's been analyzed is sifted, and it sifts. It tends towards white. I mean, the majority of the starch grains are less than 300 microns. Now, I think there's two reasons for that. That it's wild grain, and the grains are smaller, so the ratio of the bran to the endosperm is going to be greater. So a whole grain wild grain bread might be rather branny. I also am thinking of the women as a vertically integrated industrial process systems, a vertically integrated factory. So she harvested the grain, she processed, she threshed the grain, she ground the grain, she did everything, made the flour, made the sieves, sifted, made everything needed to process, and of course then fed it to her family, to her children, and her maid. And I think, and I would like some response, Jeremy, from you and others, that she found that the children, everybody liked it better when it wasn't so branny, and that sort of aesthetic, that the product was a bit more aesthetic, and so that's why we find sifting from the very beginning. There is no ancient bread, there's no Neolithic bread that I know of made with wheat that wasn't sifted and that doesn't tend towards white. Does that make sense to you?
I think we may be missing evidence of porridge, and I suspect that if you didn't have time to grind and to sift, you boiled the wheat.
Yes. Yes.
And there's good evidence for boiled starch grains 30,000 years ago.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I don't know. I've
had
some time
to add to this,
Yes.
The ancient grains, so that was the pre-wheat, the very primitive ones, they indeed, like the einkorn and the grasses that were even before this, they had relatively little endosperm, but they were also very bitter. So,
Yeah.
and there are some pre-wheat varieties still growing in the wild in around the Mediterranean area, and I ate it just to see how it tasted, and they were extremely bitter. So it could very well be that removing the bran was not only to increase the nutritiousness, but also to remove the non-tasty parts. And indeed, the boiling would help. Then there is another consideration as a nutritionist. Sorry, I interrupt. Maybe your reasoning.
No. This is brilliant.
It's,
Keep going. Keep going. This is really helpful. Thank you.
Is that nowadays we eat relatively little calories, but in the past it was very hard work. So people were consuming maybe 5,000 kilocalories a day, and eating bran containing bread, you had to poo all day if you eat this. So removing the bran gives you the energy and the proteins and the minerals, but not the bulking agent in your stomach.
Wow.
Whereas now we need bran, but in the past they had too much bran. So and they need to eat the calories to keep up the hard work. But that's reasoning. But I would make also from a nutritionist point of perspective.
That's brilliant, Peter. I mean, that is so helpful. That is so many ideas that I hadn't thought of and wasn't aware of. Absolutely brilliant. Just thank you so much. I wanted to ask 1 second, Peter, one more thing. So what was the bitterness was in the, you actually had wild acorn or wild?
No, that were wild grasses, which were predecessors of the current grains. There are some wild grasses which are still growing in the Mediterranean area. And indeed, if you talk about all kinds of colored grains, especially the purple ones, they tend to be very bitter because of the coloring that are polyphenols, like in wine. If you concentrate the red color of wine too much, it becomes bitter as well.
Yeah.
But if you go to the ancestry of wheat, it was at a certain moment crossbred with a certain grass, and then you get the hexaploid wheat. And so they are not that distant from wheat. They are bred into wheat at a certain moment. But I can imagine, I don't know if they have finds of these old ancient grasses, that they were also eaten because they have, the current grass has only very small seeds. But if you look at the old grasses, they were about half the size of a kernel of oat, for example. So I
So
can
you're thinking here
imagine
like of goat grass, which is the grass.
Yes, that's the one I was looking for. Yeah.
Did you
And the
eat?
kernel there.
Did you say you ate? Did you eat goat grass?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I ate goat oat grass, but I know the area I'm going off to holidays many times is that the grasses grown there are quite unique for that area, and I can imagine that they are not growing there. That people were eating also these wild grasses.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, goat grass is what crossed with emmer to give the wheat the DD chromosome that makes free threshing bread wheat and spelt. Spelt and free threshing bread wheat are both triticum estivum, and they have this DD chromosome. And as you will see, I don't know, we'll get to it today, but the T locus on the DD chromosome is what controls extensibility and elasticity. And my overarching narrative concept is that everybody who makes the flatbread and the loaf bread people we're both united in wanting the qualities that the T1 locus DD on the DD chromosome provides for us. Jeff.
Yeah, so I just threw up in chat William Ellis's first paragraphs from Country Housewife 1750. So this is an English textbook, but the sorts of wheat grown in England, are known as the white, the red, the yellow, right? Of sorts.
Oh.
They also are listed as the grays and the blues, right? So we have all these different colors that are known by 1750, right? Which is, pre-industrial, but early modern in our world. So that just gives you some senses of the different kind of colors that are available. I think that one thing to remember is that red wheat is incredibly hard. And so white wheat's preferred not merely because the endosperm is easily sifted to take off the color. You get a quicker white flour with white. If you start off with something that's whiter, you get to white flour quicker, because the even pieces of the endosperm that are left in the sifting are hidden versus red wheat shows up. We're used to seeing what red wheat is, but it was also really difficult to grind with stone. So what we see is there's a correlation between red wheat being grown in the Caucasus and Ukraine and Hungary and the rise of roller mills. So when roller mills are invented in that area, they're invented with steel blades in order to deal with the wheat that they were growing. It's called Turkey red. That's what came to North America. So by the time Turkey red came to North America in the late 18th century, like the 1870s, it took over the production in Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, Wisconsin, and as well as the technology came from Hungary, the roller mill. So you have a harder wheat along with a new technology, and then that's what takes over our bread making. Our bread making becomes different because that wheat has more gluten, and that was in the period they say, hey, look, like there's people that are trying to prove here's how to make bread with the old flour. They call this new processed flour because they're able to take off that endosperm, take away the red, and make it whiter. So flour became wider because of the technology. Even though it was red wheat, they were able to make it look wider. Whereas in the old technology, using white wheat was a smarter way of going because you're going to have less sifting to get it to be white. So red wheat is now the dominant wheat. I mean, white wheat's only grown in like the Pacific Northwest and in Michigan and parts of New York. That's it in America. Everyone else is growing red wheat. And the South grows some white wheat, but even theirs is red wheat because it doesn't matter because we're rolling it with roller mills. The technology, today's thought process is based on today's technology, but back then their technologies were different. And their wheats, though, they had the same semblance. I mean, even in 1750, they list red, white, yellow, blue. I mean, it wasn't that like the majority was white. They list all of them out. Like, here's all the different wheats that we had available. So I think the color has a lot to do with it early on, but now, like I said, it becomes white because we want white bread, but we make white bread easier with red wheat now.
Thank you, Jeff. That was absolutely brilliant. And William Ellis. Do you want to just tell people the book because
Oh yeah, I wrote down the title, Country Housewife, 1750. It's available on Google, as well as there's a great copy with our friend who wrote the preface to it, and I'm just losing his name.
Right, hold on. Right, Prospect Books.
He joins our group sometimes.
Oh no, that's not him.
Malcolm, yeah, Malcolm.
Oh, Malcolm.
Yeah,
Okay.
he wrote the preface to the Prospect Book edition.
That's right, Malcolm Thick. That's right. So,
Malcolm Thick wrote but you can find it on Google as well, just the original version.
But actually, Malcolm Thick just
has
wrote
a great introduction.
Malcolm Thick just wrote a biography of William Ellis. William Ellis is it's a brilliant book. He was really a born ethnographer, and there's lots of barley bread in it. And he goes around his neighborhood and he interviews the women making bread, and she asks them what bread do you make? But she also and a lot of them are making barley bread in his region. And he also, the ethnographer part is he says how many horses they have. He gives financial data points that help you understand the relative wealth of the people that he's talking to. He was known for having a very, very sloppy farm. He was a mess, and I can relate to that. But also being an expert on farming, he also wrote about brewing. So it is 10:30, almost 10:30. This has been extraordinary session for me. I just can't thank um, those of you who have come here to support me, and it really means a lot to me. And then the comments today have really been exemplary, really, really, really exemplary. I've learned I've learned a lot, and helps me go back and revise the text a little bit. Maybe not in this introduction, but in other parts. I had really neglected. It was very, very helpful. And yes, I don't mention porridge much. I should probably. I had various sentences here where I mentioned, and of course they made porridge, which I took out. I can put them back, perhaps. But my point is, and I think the point is that porridge did not drive domestication, that grain domestication and the growing of wheat is driven by bread. But yes, absolutely, there have been times and places where porridge, or we have kasha in Central Europe, that are really important foods. Now, for our future together, since I am promising to keep this up. Would you like to have the same, just read through this chapter and continue as we were today? So I schedule for like 2 weeks from now and we do the same thing? Or would you like to switch subjects? Let's hear, maybe, can you use the hands bit? I'm going to put back onto gallery view. What's the
Well,
feeling?
you can unmute everyone if you want.
Oh, I'll unmute everybody. How do I do that? Okay. I know everybody participants. Where's my
You
unmute?
know, one of the things that I was trying to get at is if you take Asian bread history back, right, it always centers around the concept of what is called fon, or, something that you can make out of, it wasn't usually wheat, which was back then was primarily used to make sugar with, but millets of all kinds, and other really soft grains that can be made into porridges. And it was really only until other areas who were seeking gluten, really, in the history of, bread changed, I think. So, I know you tend to underrate barley, and I certainly would agree that it is and has historically always been associated with, a whole caste system, really. But I think the same can be said of millet as well, and how that also fed into the development of wheat as the primary thing that everyone wanted to use. So
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, I do get to barley in the we're talking about a big narrative where where wheat rules, where there's one ring that rules them all. But I want to resolve how we would like to proceed. So I've unmuted everybody, or asked you all to unmute. I don't see where the little electronic raise your hand is. So I really want some reaction from the group. Do you want to continue with this, say in 3 weeks? Just continue reading and discussing. Is that a yes, Jeff?
Yes, sounds great.
Yes.
And
3 weeks.
hold on, no, don't. Ann Gooding, yes.
Yeah, I'm fine to carry on this way.
We'll carry on this way. Everyone's good?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I will leave the room open for another half an hour, but and we can just continue. We can continue talking.